The velvet darkness of the Arabian night was shattered by a sudden eruption of fire and fury as the clock ticked past the United Nations deadline. High above the sleeping city of Baghdad, the sky transformed into a chaotic tapestry of tracer fire and anti-aircraft bursts. It was the early morning of January 17, 1991, and the world was witnessing the beginning of Operation Desert Storm. Inside the cockpit of a stealth fighter, a lone pilot watched the green glow of his instruments while navigating through the most heavily defended airspace in the history of warfare. The silence of the desert floor below belied the technological storm that was about to be unleashed upon the Iraqi command centers. The stakes could not have been higher for the international coalition assembled in the sands of Saudi Arabia. Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait months earlier and now possessed the fourth largest army in the world. His forces were dug in deep behind formidable fortifications and protected by a sophisticated network of French and Soviet-made air defense systems. If the air campaign failed to blind and cripple the Iraqi military machine, the ground war would become a bloody war of attrition reminiscent of the First World War. Thousands of coalition lives hung in the balance as military planners waited to see if their complex strategy of precision strikes would dismantle the enemy or lead to disaster. At the center of this immense strategic undertaking stood Lieutenant General Charles Horner, the architect of the air campaign. As the Joint Force Air Component Commander, he bore the crushing responsibility of coordinating thousands of aircraft from different nations into a single cohesive force. Charles Horner was a no-nonsense leader who understood that air power had to be ruthless and overwhelming to minimize friendly casualties. He spent months staring at maps and intelligence reports in the basement of the Royal Saudi Air Force headquarters in Riyadh. His vision was not just to support ground troops, but to paralyze the Iraqi leadership and sever their ability to communicate with their forces in the field. The central question looming over the command center was whether the unproven technology of stealth aircraft could actually penetrate the dense radar coverage around Baghdad. Critics back in the United States had argued that the F-117 Nighthawk was too expensive and perhaps ineffective in real combat conditions. The Iraqi capital was defended by overlapping rings of surface-to-air missiles and thousands of anti-aircraft guns waiting to shred any intruder. If the stealth fighters were detected before they could drop their laser-guided bombs, the element of surprise would be lost instantly. The entire opening phase of the war depended on these angular black jets slipping through the electronic net unseen. The answer came with a thunderous impact that shook the foundations of the Iraqi regime and changed warfare forever. The first F-117 Nighthawk pilots successfully delivered their payloads directly onto critical communication hubs and defense centers in downtown Baghdad. The world watched in awe as live television broadcasts captured the precision strikes that took out the AT&T building and other strategic targets with pinpoint accuracy. The feared Iraqi air defense network was left blind and confused, firing wildly into the night sky at phantoms that were already gone. This initial success proved that the coalition owned the night and that the era of precision air dominance had truly arrived. Before the jets arrived over Baghdad, a daring secret mission had already paved the way for the aerial armada. Task Force Normandy, consisting of United States Army Apache helicopters led by Lieutenant Colonel Richard Cody, flew low over the desert dunes in total radio silence. Their target was a pair of early warning radar sites deep inside Iraq that monitored the approaches to the capital. Using night vision goggles and flying mere feet above the ground, the helicopter crews destroyed the radar stations with Hellfire missiles exactly at H hour. This surgical strike punched a massive hole in the Iraqi radar coverage, allowing hundreds of non-stealth coalition aircraft to pour through the gap safely. With the radar network breached, the skies over Iraq filled with a swarm of coalition aircraft ranging from F-15 Eagles to British Tornadoes. The sheer volume of sorties flown in those first 24 hours was unprecedented in military history. Every type of target was hit simultaneously, from electrical power grids to Scud missile bunkers and airfields. The strategy was to induce a state of strategic paralysis, where the Iraqi leadership would be cut off from the population and the army. General Charles Horner monitored the flow of the battle from the Tactical Air Control Center, ensuring that the carefully choreographed dance of destruction continued without interruption. The Iraqi Air Force attempted to mount a defense, but they were quickly overwhelmed by the superior training and technology of the coalition pilots. In the first few days of the conflict, United States Air Force F-15 pilots engaged Iraqi MiGs in swirling dogfights. The coalition achieved air superiority, almost immediately forcing Iraqi pilots to either stay grounded or flee across the border to Iran. This total dominance of the skies meant that coalition aircraft could roam freely over the battlefield, hunting for targets of opportunity. The psychological impact on the Iraqi ground troops was devastating, as they realized they had no protection from the relentless bombardment raining down from above. Despite the overwhelming success of the initial strikes, a new and dangerous threat emerged that tested the resolve of the coalition leaders. Saddam Hussein began launching Scud missiles at Israel and Saudi Arabia in a desperate attempt to fracture the alliance. These mobile missile launchers were difficult to track and could hide in culverts or under bridges during the day. The political pressure to stop these attacks was immense, as Israel threatened to retaliate and potentially alienate the Arab nations in the coalition. General Charles Horner was forced to divert significant air resources to the Great Scud Hunt, sending pilots on dangerous missions to scour the vast western desert for elusive targets. The hunt for Scud missiles became a frustrating game of cat and mouse for the pilots flying F-15E Strike Eagles and A-10 Thunderbolts. They had to fly low over hostile territory, searching for heat signatures or the telltale flash of a launch. The Iraqi crews were skilled at shoot and scoot tactics, launching their missiles and disappearing before coalition aircraft could arrive. Although the military effectiveness of the Scuds was limited, their terror value was high. The diversion of sorties to hunt Scuds slowed down the systematic destruction of the Iraqi army, but it was a necessary political maneuver to keep the coalition united against the common enemy. While the Scud hunt continued, the systematic dismantling of the Iraqi ground forces in Kuwait began in earnest. The B-52 Stratofortress bombers, which had been a symbol of American air power since the Cold War, were called into action. Flying from bases as far away as the United States and the United Kingdom, these massive aircraft dropped tons of gravity bombs on Iraqi troop concentrations. The psychological effect of these carpet bombing raids was profound, shaking the earth and shattering the morale of the conscript soldiers dug into the sand. Iraqi prisoners later revealed that the B-52 strikes were the most terrifying aspect of the war for the infantry. The air campaign also showcased the capabilities of the A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately known as the Warthog by its pilots and crews. Designed specifically for close air support and tank killing, the A-10 proved to be a devastating weapon against Iraqi armor. Pilots flew low and slow over the battlefield, using their massive 30mm rotary cannons to shred tanks and armored vehicles. The Warthog pilots operated in a high-threat environment, often returning to base with their aircraft riddled with bullet holes from ground fire. Their bravery and the durability of their aircraft earned them legendary status among the ground troops they supported. Another critical element of the air war was the suppression of enemy air defenses, or SEAD missions, flown by the Wild Weasels. These brave pilots flew F-4G Phantoms and F-16s equipped with high-speed anti-radiation missiles designed to home in on enemy radar signals. Their job was to fly into the teeth of the Iraqi defenses and bait the surface-to-air missile operators into turning on their radars. Once a radar became active, the Wild Weasels would launch their missiles to destroy the site. It was a dangerous game of chicken that allowed the rest of the strike packages to operate with relative safety. The coordination required to manage thousands of daily sorties was a logistical miracle orchestrated by the Air Tasking Order. This document was the daily script for the air war, detailing every mission target and refueling rendezvous. In the days before advanced digital networks, the Air Tasking Order was a massive physical document that had to be flown to aircraft carriers and distant air bases each day. General Charles Horner and his staff worked around the clock to update and refine the plan based on battle damage assessments and changing priorities. The ability to manage this complexity gave the coalition a decisive advantage over the rigid Iraqi command structure. As the air campaign entered its third week, the focus shifted heavily toward preparing the battlefield for the eventual ground invasion. This phase involved targeting the Republican Guard divisions, which were the elite forces of Saddam Hussein. Coalition aircraft used laser-guided bombs to pick off tanks and artillery pieces one by one. This practice became known as tank plinking, and it significantly degraded the combat power of the Iraqi armored divisions. The use of infrared targeting systems allowed pilots to see the heat retained by the metal tanks at night, turning the darkness into a shooting gallery for coalition air power. The psychological operations aspect of the air campaign was also a key factor in breaking the will of the Iraqi army. Coalition aircraft dropped millions of leaflets over Iraqi positions, warning them of impending attacks and instructing them on how to surrender. These leaflets were often followed by B-52 strikes, reinforcing the message that resistance was futile. Many Iraqi soldiers who were already suffering from poor supplies and low morale chose to desert their posts or surrender at the first opportunity. The air campaign was effectively winning the ground war before a single coalition tank had crossed the border into Kuwait. One of the most controversial incidents of the air war occurred when two laser-guided bombs struck the Amaria shelter in Baghdad. Intelligence reports had identified the facility as a command and control bunker, but it was also being used as a civilian air raid shelter. The resulting loss of civilian life caused a global outcry and forced the coalition to tighten its targeting procedures for strikes in downtown Baghdad. General Charles Horner and the command staff faced intense scrutiny and had to balance the need to destroy strategic targets with the imperative to minimize collateral damage. The incident highlighted the tragic complexities of modern aerial warfare. The naval air power of the United States Navy and Marine Corps also played a vital role in the campaign, operating from aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. Navy pilots flew A-6 Intruders and FA-18 Hornets, conducting strikes against port facilities, naval vessels, and coastal defenses. The coordination between the Air Force and Navy was not without its friction, but under the unified command structure, they operated as a singular force. The ability to launch strikes from the sea provided the coalition with flexibility and allowed them to attack targets from multiple directions, complicating the Iraqi defensive plans. The British Royal Air Force made significant contributions, particularly in the dangerous low-level airfield denial missions. Tornado GR-1 pilots flew at treetop height to drop specialized runway cratering bombs on Iraqi air bases. These missions were incredibly hazardous, and the Royal Air Force suffered a disproportionate number of aircraft losses in the early days of the war. Despite the high risks, the British pilots displayed immense courage and skill in rendering Iraqi airfields unusable. Their efforts ensured that the Iraqi Air Force remained trapped on the ground, unable to challenge coalition supremacy or escape to safety. As the weeks passed, the cumulative effect of the air campaign began to show on the Iraqi infrastructure. Bridges supplying the Kuwaiti theater of operations were systematically dropped into the rivers, cutting off supply lines. The electrical grid was dismantled, leaving Baghdad and other major cities in the dark. Oil refineries and storage depots were set ablaze, creating plumes of black smoke that drifted across the region. The systematic destruction was designed to isolate the Iraqi army in Kuwait and starve them of fuel, ammunition, and food. The once mighty war machine was being strangled from the air. The effectiveness of the air campaign was further enhanced by the use of the E-3 Sentry AWACS aircraft. These airborne radar stations served as the eyes of the coalition air forces, monitoring all air traffic for hundreds of miles. The mission crews on board the AWACS directed fighters to intercept enemy aircraft and manage the complex flow of tankers and strike aircraft. Their presence ensured that coalition commanders had a real-time picture of the entire battle space. This information dominance allowed the coalition to react instantly to any Iraqi moves and maintain total control over the skies. Refueling tankers were the unsung heroes of the air campaign, acting as gas stations in the sky for the thirsty jets. KC-135 and KC-10 tankers flew constant orbits near the Iraqi border, allowing strike aircraft to top off their fuel tanks before and after their missions. Without this massive aerial refueling effort, the reach and endurance of the coalition air forces would have been severely limited. Pilots often spoke of the relief they felt seeing a tanker waiting for them as they exited hostile airspace running on fumes. The logistics of keeping these tankers airborne 24 hours a day was a monumental achievement. The French Air Force also participated in the air campaign, flying Jaguar and Mirage aircraft. Their involvement was politically significant, demonstrating the broad international support for the liberation of Kuwait. French pilots operated primarily against targets in Kuwait and southern Iraq, focusing on ammunition dumps and artillery positions. Their familiarity with some of the French made equipment used by the Iraqi military provided valuable intelligence to the coalition planners. The integration of the French Air Force into the American-led command structure was a testament to the diplomatic success of the coalition-building effort. As the deadline for the ground invasion approached, the airstrikes intensified against the Iraqi frontline fortifications. This barrier, known as the Saddam Line, consisted of sand berms, minefields, and oil trenches designed to slow down coalition tanks. Aircraft dropped fuel, air explosives, and napalm to breach these defenses and detonate the minefields. The goal was to create clear lanes for the coalition ground forces to advance rapidly. The relentless pounding of the frontline positions ensured that when the ground war finally started, the Iraqi defenders were dazed and disoriented. The final days of the air campaign saw a shift toward interdiction missions aimed at preventing the retreat of Iraqi forces. The highways leading north out of Kuwait became killing zones as coalition aircraft attacked convoys of military vehicles attempting to flee. The most infamous of these was the Highway of Death, where hundreds of vehicles were destroyed in a bottleneck. While the images of the destruction were graphic and controversial, they demonstrated the total inability of the Iraqi army to move under the gaze of coalition air power. The retreat had turned into a rout. General Charles Horner knew that the success of the ground war depended on the thoroughness of the air preparation. He resisted pressure from some ground commanders to start the land offensive, early insisting that the air campaign needed time to achieve its full effect. His patience proved to be strategically sound. By the time the ground offensive, named Desert Sabre, began, the Iraqi army had been reduced to roughly 50% of its combat effectiveness. The air campaign had not only softened the enemy, but had effectively broken their back before the first tank battle occurred. The ground war lasted only 100 hours, a testament to the devastating effectiveness of the preceding air campaign. Coalition troops advanced with surprising speed, meeting little organized resistance from the demoralized Iraqi units. Many Iraqi soldiers surrendered to the first coalition forces they saw, including news crews and drones. The swift victory was a direct result of the weeks of relentless bombardment that had stripped the Iraqi army of its command structure and will to fight. The air war had validated the doctrine that air power could be a decisive factor in modern conflict. Following the ceasefire, General Charles Horner and the coalition air forces transitioned to enforcing the peace terms. The skies over Iraq remained under strict coalition control, ensuring that Saddam Hussein could not use his remaining aircraft to threaten his neighbors or his own people. The no-fly zones that were established in the north and south of Iraq would remain in place for over a decade. The legacy of the air campaign extended far beyond the end of the combat operations, shaping the geopolitical landscape of the region for years to come. The technological innovations showcased during the First Gulf War changed the public perception of warfare. The images of laser-guided bombs going down ventilation shafts created an impression of clean and surgical warfare. While the reality on the ground was still brutal and chaotic, the precision of the air campaign was undeniable. It marked the end of the era of massed unguided bombing and the beginning of the age of smart weapons. Military analysts around the world studied the conflict to understand the new paradigm of high-tech air dominance. For the pilots who flew the missions, the war was a life-changing experience that tested their skill and courage. They had faced one of the densest air defense networks in the world and emerged victorious. The camaraderie formed in the cockpits and on the flight lines forged bonds that would last a lifetime. Many of them would go on to lead the Air Force in future conflicts, applying the lessons learned in the skies over Iraq. Their professionalism and dedication were the human element behind the technological marvel of the air campaign. The role of space assets in the air campaign cannot be overstated, as it was the first space war in history. Satellites provided crucial communication links, navigation data through the global positioning system, and early warning of Scud launches. The integration of space-based capabilities with tactical air power gave the coalition a significant asymmetric advantage. Commanders could communicate with units halfway around the world in real time, and pilots could navigate across the featureless desert with unprecedented accuracy. This reliance on space systems would become a hallmark of all future United States military operations. The environmental impact of the war became a major concern, as retreating Iraqi forces set fire to hundreds of Kuwaiti oil wells. The resulting smoke blocked out the sun, turning day into night and complicating air operations. Pilots had to fly through thick black clouds of oily smoke that obscured targets and fouled their engines. The air campaign had to adapt to these hellish conditions, using infrared sensors to peer through the gloom. The environmental terrorism practiced by the Iraqi regime added another layer of complexity to an already difficult mission. The success of the air campaign also highlighted the importance of joint operations between the different branches of the military. The Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marines worked together more closely than in any previous conflict. The Goldwater-Nichols Act, which had reorganized the Department of Defense just years earlier, was credited with streamlining the chain of command. General Norman Schwarzkopf, the overall theater commander, relied heavily on the expertise of General Charles Horner to manage the air component. This unity of command was essential in executing such a complex and fast-paced campaign. As the dust settled on the desert, the world began to analyze the full scope of the victory. The Iraqi military, which had been feared as a regional superpower, had been dismantled in a matter of weeks with minimal coalition casualties. The ratio of losses was historically lopsided, largely due to the overwhelming advantage in air power. The first Gulf War proved that a well-executed air campaign could achieve strategic objectives that were previously thought to require a massive ground invasion. It was a vindication for the proponents of air power who had long argued for its decisiveness. The lessons of the first Gulf War air campaign continue to influence military strategy to this day. The concepts of parallel warfare, where multiple target sets are attacked simultaneously to induce paralysis, became standard doctrine. The emphasis on stealth, precision, and information dominance has only grown in the decades since. Operation Desert Storm stands as a watershed moment in military history, marking the transition from the industrial age of warfare to the information age. The dominance of the skies over Iraq was total and complete. In the end, the story of the air campaign is not just about technology, but about the people who planned and executed it. From the strategic vision of General Charles Horner to the courage of the individual pilots and the tireless work of the ground crews, it was a monumental human effort. They operated under extreme pressure in a harsh environment to achieve a decisive victory. The liberation of Kuwait was the ultimate goal, and it was achieved through the relentless application of air power. The thunder of the jets over Baghdad signaled a new chapter in the history of warfare. The first Gulf War air campaign remains a case study in military excellence and strategic planning. It demonstrated what can be achieved when political will, military capability, and international cooperation align. The skies over Iraq were the testing ground for the future of combat, and the results were unequivocal. The coalition forces had not just won a battle, they had redefined the art of war. As the sun set on a liberated Kuwait, the echoes of the air war faded into history, leaving behind a legacy that would be studied for generations.